So I wonder if you have ever been reading a book, maybe this has happened to you recently, and suddenly you realize, I can't really picture this. It's like you're reading and everything's fine, and then you realize that you're not really picturing the characters or the place. Or maybe you are picturing something, and then all of a sudden you read a detail and you begin to wonder whether you were picturing things all wrong. So that second scenario probably happens to me more often. I have a clear picture in my head, and then I read something, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what I was picturing at all. So this is something that happens, especially when we're reading historical fiction, because we are talking about real places and real time periods, and sometimes it helps to have a vision of what that actually looked like to help us better understand the story. And you guys are lucky because you don't really have to wonder what things looked like. You can usually find that out. And that's just one of the benefits of living in an age where so many photographs and illustrations have been archived, which is digitally collected. If I want to know what the Dust Bowl looks like, for example, so I'm going to flip to a picture. And this was a book that I had on the list, and none of the groups chose this book, but it's called Out of the Dust. It's a wonderful book, and it takes place during the Great Depression. And when I first thought of this book, Out of the Dust, I picture dust, right? But then they talk a lot about the Dust Bowl, and in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, is this like a bowl of dust? I can't really picture what this is like because I've never experienced that. So I can go to photographs and I can see what the characters in that time were really coping with. And so I'm going to show you. So this is a photograph by a famous photographer, Dorothea Lange, and she took this photograph. This is a photograph of a mother and her three children, and they were suffering during the Great Depression. They were in complete poverty, and this is a real snapshot of that moment in time. And you can just tell by the look on the mother's face and her three children hiding, and they look dusty and dirty. And this kind of gives you a sense of the real people from that time. And then here's some more photographs that I found. This is the Dust Bowl, right? So it's not necessarily a bowl, but wow, look at that dust. I mean, this is what they were dealing with. It was literally just it was like raining dust. So huge clouds covering everything. I can't imagine trying to breathe in this, and forget any kind of crops or anything surviving in this kind of condition. So this really gets lets me picture what these people were struggling with, and how they were even able to survive in this is amazing. So looking at photographs can really give you a good sense of a story and a time period. So we're going to do a little bit of this work with Number the Stars, and you're going to be asked to also do this with the books you are reading for your book club, or maybe for your book report, the book that you read for your book report. So here we have our objective. So we are readers of historical fiction, often study images, photographs, and illustrations from the time period, and we synthesize them into relevant parts of our novel. So we think about what part of the book does this photograph show or represent, and this helps us to better understand the time period. So I'm going to show you a picture now. This is King Christian X of Denmark, and if you think back to Number the Stars, the very first chapter, when Anne Marie was talking to her sister and telling her a story, and her sister said, "Tell me a story about a king." And so Anne Marie started this story, and she talked about their king, King Christian X of Denmark. He was king during World War II. And as I was reading this part, the first time I read this book, I definitely wasn't picturing this picture. In my mind, I was picturing, an old fairy tale kind of king. And you know how the horses they would ride always seem to have like fancy things on, and they're like feathers coming out of their manes, and they just were very fancy. And the kings would be wearing these big capes with these like big collars, and that's kind of what I pictured when I first read this. But when you see this picture, you definitely get a different sense of the history. And so I'm going to just read you a part from the novel, from Number the Stars. King Christian was a real human being, a man with a serious, kind face. Each morning he had come from the palace on his horse Jubilee and ridden along through the streets of Copenhagen, greeting his people. So when I first read this, I pictured this one image. And then when I see this actual image, the first thing I'm thinking is, does this picture fit with what I'd been thinking? And it doesn't. I was kind of picturing a fairy tale man with his horse and feathers and capes galloping through the streets like Prince Valiant. But the first thing that I noticed in this photo is how real it looks and how serious. And you can see in the foreground that there's this tall, serious man riding a horse. And we know that King Christian was really tall. And the horse doesn't have feathers, but he is big and strong, and he looks proud. So then the next thing I do when I'm looking at real photographs is I kind of look for details. So I'm kind of trying to understand this time war, and I see all the people just crowded right up. There's no security guards, there's no detail, there's no anything. Their people are just standing right next to his horse, touching the horse. The little boy in front's even reaching out and touching the horse, and the king is smiling, like doesn't bother him. And there's also a little girl on a bike who's just like riding alongside, and I'm just trying to picture doing this with like a president. And it just seems unreal because our presidents just have so much security around them. So this really gives you a sense of this country and how proud they were, and the fact that their king actually did ride through the streets on a horse. That was part of the story that is true. And so I can definitely get a better feel for the characters and this setting of the story when I see a picture like this. Another picture that I want to show you is I want to have you do a little bit of this activity. So you don't need to have anything with you, just kind of have be thinking. We are going to ask ourselves a few questions. What part of the novel does this picture fit with? What part of the novel does this raise questions about? And we're going to really study the picture and look at the details. And we're going to think, does it fit with the picture that I already had in my head, or does it add to it or change it? So you're going to do that work with this next set of pictures. So these are 3 photographs that I found from the occupation of Denmark during World War II. So we know from the story that the Nazi soldiers had occupied Denmark, meaning that they had soldiers in the country. They were there for many years. And this is what it looked like. And so I want you to just think to yourself, do these images fit with the images that you had in your mind? And think to yourself, what parts of the story do these images fit with? What parts of Number the Stars do these kind of go with? And does this change your thinking about the story? And does it bring up any questions that you had, or does it really change how you feel about everything? So just think about that for a minute. So I would definitely say, and I'm guessing a lot of you probably had the same reaction, that when I see these pictures, I'm thinking to myself, first of all, wow, I can't imagine, especially this middle picture with the tanks just rolling through these beautiful streets with these beautiful row houses, and these giant tanks with soldiers coming out of them just doesn't fit at all. And I'm trying to imagine carrying on with my daily normal life with this going down the street. And for one thing, I'm picturing how loud it probably was to have that rolling through the streets of my beautiful little street in Copenhagen. So that's one thing that is shocking. I think in the book, we kind of tend to think about a couple soldiers on a corner, but this was really, it was tanks and thousands of soldiers, not just a couple on a street corner. And then the picture on the left here shows two soldiers, and they're actually, you can see their guns and you can see that they are fully dressed. And then you see some regular citizens walking the other way. And this is just their new normal. And as you see on the picture on the right, there's the soldiers walking through the streets, marching down the middle of the street. And you can see that the Danish people on the side are just kind of standing there like, what is happening? So this is the world Anne Marie and Ellen were living in. This is the time, and this is what was happening. And so it kind of helps to understand, and even makes us think, wow, how brave were they all? Because these images are very intimidating to me and very scary. And Anne Marie and Ellen, this is what they saw. So it's so important for you to go and do this work in your book. So your job today is to try and find some images. And you don't have to print them out, but maybe save them on your iPad, save them on a computer, but try to find at least one or two images from the time period of your books that you're reading with your book club. And we're going to look at those pictures together when we meet in small groups for our book club meetings this week. And we're just going to talk about and do this work with those pictures and try to see if it can help us better understand our stories.